Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Hodgkinson, editor of the Idler magazine, and welcome to our Drink with the Idler with Nick Hayes. Can you say hello, Nick?
Hello.
And Mark Vernon. Are you there, Mark?
Hi there. How you doing?
Tonight's moderator is Kathleen. Kathleen, say hi to everybody.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you.
This is Kathleen Mayer. Victoria is kind of observing, but we can't really hear her and we can't really see her. She's on retreat in Umbria, having a lovely time sort of sitting around doing nothing all day. Isn't that right, Vic? You see what I mean? We can't hear a single word she's saying. Okay, let's unmute everybody and say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Oh, here we come streaming in. Lovely to see everybody. Thanks for joining us. Get your questions ready. We're hoping to have Murray Lachlan Young this evening as well, doing a song, actually, a folk song, the subject of which I'll keep secret until we actually have it. And before that, we'll be talking to Mark Vernon and our guest, Nick Hayes, author of the Book of Trespass, which is a really wonderful book. We highly recommend it. It's about Nick's actual trespassing, but more than that, it's a story of land in Britain and a question of who owns the land. And it's about enclosures and it's about our attitude to nature and so on. So it's right up our street at the Idler. It's just the kind of thing that we like reading, and it's a very, very good read. It's really funny too. So we're looking forward to chatting to Nick. Hello from everyone down the side. Hello, Paul and Kate in Portsmouth.
Hello.
Is it sunny down there?
Of course. It's always sunny here.
It's always sunny in Portsmouth, yeah. Thanks for your card. It looks like a pretty grim place from your own account. Anyway, no, we've got people from all over the world. So this is really lovely, from Hamburg, San Diego. Now, Kathleen, should we mute everybody and go over to Mark?
Yes, if everybody could mute themselves, then we can get started.
Hey there. How's that sounding from me?
That sounded good, Mark. Now, where are you this week? Because you're not at home. You're peripatetic. You're wandering. In fact, you've been exploring the wide open spaces.
I have. In fact, I'm noticing a few people in the chat saying they're either in Cumbria or the Scottish borders. And I have come from the Scottish borders into Cumbria myself today. So I'm beaming in from the Eden Hall Country House B&B, which is very beautiful. And it's quite timely that we've got Nick on this evening, I hope, because I've actually been trying to visit various stone circles and ancient springs myself. And thinking about this evening's talk come up, I realized how nervous I get when I feel I might be trespassing. You know, so I've got a book, it's got lots of these ancient sites with directions of how to find them and so on. But I realize I am ultra cautious actually about, you know, this is a style here, but we're allowed to cross it, but what happens in this field and all that. So yesterday, for example, I was in Stowe in southern Scotland, where there's a very, very ancient spring. It goes back at least to the 5th century AD, probably pre-Christian as well. I just wanted to like splash my hair in the water and got very anxious as we got to the final field, because it wasn't clear whether there was a public footpath or not. And that made me think a lot about how a lot of this sort of fear of trespassing and so on is actually quite internal. And this linked me to my philosopher for this week, who is the French philosopher Michel Foucault. He died in the mid-1980s. And he's very interesting to think about now because he's actually behind a huge amount of the identity politics that's doing the rounds, with its associated fear of what you can and can't say, that seems to be just building pressure more and more and more in our culture now. And it's very ironic to me that this is the case, because I got into Foucault when I was looking at the very last period of his life. He died in the mid-1980s. He died of HIV when AIDS was first appearing. So died too young. He died tragically young and was still working on what has become identity politics now. But tragically, he was working on how to move beyond identity politics. He very famously linked the notion of power and knowledge, so that those who control the knowledge, who we are, what we tell ourselves about ourselves and so on, are the ones that have power in our culture. But he himself was really interested in how to move beyond that and resist, particularly labeling yourself, actually. So he very famously refused to come out. He was a gay man. He was in a relationship for many, many years, but refused to say that he was gay for quite a long time, until he was really forced to, because he realized that he would be penning himself in by borrowing this label. So it's something very strange has happened, that now this Foucauldian idea about power and knowledge seems to be trapping people. An industry kind of grew up around Foucault's ideas in the academic world. You know, endless people doing their PhDs on the minutiae of bits of Foucault's texts. And for someone like me who has stepped apart from the academy, it speaks about the tragedy of the academy so often, that the need to deliver on some footnote means that people disappear down epicycles of knowledge, and fail to realize often what these original philosophers like Foucault were aiming at, which was actually liberation. And in Foucault's case, the liberation beyond, I think, particularly the kind of internal ways that we police ourselves and wonder whether we're trespassing on something. That's my wonder about the link to what Nick might talk about later on this evening. He famously described our culture as a panoptic culture, and he used the image of a prison designed by Jeremy Bentham, the founder of utilitarianism, which he designed a prison that had a central tower with a kind of circular wall around this central tower, and built into the wall were all the prison cells. And the idea was that one person in the central tower could monitor all these prisoners in the circular prison cells around him. And then this model is internalized, so that we feel that, as it were, there's a kind of central prison officer monitoring what we're doing every moment of the day, which of course is become part of ourselves. And the more it becomes part of ourselves, the more powerful it becomes. And I feel that we're seeing something of this in the culture wars that are going on right now. Foucault's way out, to come to the close of my thoughts, was to try and live at the edge of this trespass. So for me, it became really important when I was pushing across this field to find this ancient spring in southern Scotland, to like brave almost my fear, and to get to that well, to get to that spring, to put the water on my head, and then to feel what that experience was like. And it was, you know, in its small way, it was pretty liberating. And he was a bit like the ancient skeptics in the ancient Greek world. Regulars to the Idler Drinks will know that I'm very fond of the ancient Greeks. And they advised living at the edge of the circle of life. And the idea was that inside the circle is what's safe, outside the circle is what's unsafe. They recommend you don't run either right to the middle of the circle and just try and surround yourself by safety all the time, but neither actually run right outside the circle, because that makes for a different kind of hell. But try and work out where the edge is between what feels safe and what feels unsafe might be. And so I'm wondering how Nick might pick these things up, and what he, very directly, I guess, having explored a lot of these boundaries around trespass on the land, and how it might speak to this internal trespassing that we monitor ourselves, actually, regardless of what other people say, that feels so intense in our times. And for me, doubly tragic, because Foucault himself was trying to find a way out of these things. Tom, I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think Foucault is also a fantastic historian, actually, because what he says is that, you know, there's more in common between different attitudes in literature and art and science at one point in history than they have with themselves later. So, you know, science, art, literature, music all speak to each other at one time, and they don't naturally progress from their earlier versions independently, if you see what I mean.
They all belong to the same episteme, I think was the word he used.
The episteme,
That's it, yes. That was the word you're looking for.
Yeah, and so someone down the side, Julia, has just said, well, you know, Facebook is the panopticon. There is that feeling that you're being sort of looked at and spied upon, which is extremely unsettling. And I suppose that's what you sort of deliberately throw yourself into that world when trespassing. Now, Nick, hello.
Hello.
Now, you did English at Cambridge, and did you study Foucault and these sorts of people? You do talk about Foucault in the book, I think.
He crops up, yeah, in a number of situations. It actually took me ages. I knew in my heart and soul that there must be this whole seam of philosophy about what I found out later was to be called spatial politics or social spatial interaction. And I found Henri Lefebvre and Guy Debord and Edward Soja, I've never heard his name.
All the other unpronounceable situationists.
Yeah, exactly. And completely esoteric, you've really got to dig deep. But for me, they all sort of coalesced in what a lot of the things Foucault was saying. And it really felt exciting to read some of the things. So I talk about Foucault when I'm talking about Greenham Common. I talk about Foucault when, he had this notion of heterotopia, which was
what was that, heterotopia? That's we're all sorts of things can be fun.
Yeah, it's his was quite esoteric. It's this sort of both real and non-real place. One of his examples of a heterotopia was a cemetery or a mirror, what you see in the mirror. But essentially, how I interpreted it, because it's only a very short essay. I compared it to Grow Heathrow and Greenham Common, because these heterotopias are places that reflect the consensus and orthodoxy of society by not being them, by challenging them. And with the Greenham women, it was, they were kind of sandwiched between two orthodoxies, the kind of, kind of Reagan paternalistic, there is, or Thatcher as well, there is no alternative to nuclear war, or there is no alternative to neoliberalism. And this kind of very stony-faced authoritarian glare of the military that was coming out of this nuclear bunker that was placed smack bang in the middle of Newbury Common. But also, on the other side, they had this kind of orthodoxy of what you call the patriarchy, which was essentially this kind of idea that women should know their place. And if women were sort of mud spattered, or if women stank, which the Daily Mail made a whole heap of fuss about, if women flaunted their sexuality or kind of boasted about their kind of alternative living, these are all the words that were used in the newspaper reports at the time, they were kind of breaking their kind of spatial orthodoxy, which was basically to be at home and bringing up children. And for me, that was very much a Foucault idea of heterotopia, because they just were not being society whilst being. Deep in the right at the coalface of society, bringing in however many, like 93 nuclear missiles to Greenham Common in Newbury, just put Newbury, which I grew up like 7 miles away, like #1 on the hit list for the Kremlin. And so how the hell the residents of Newbury thought it was acceptable to blame the women of Greenham and not, the system of nuclear power, speaks something about how internalized these orthodoxies are.
Now, Nick, tell us where you've trespassed. The book is very reflective. It's funny. It's beautifully written. There's lots of sort of nature writing in it. But at the heart of it is this idea that you go and actually trespass in different places. And I think you sort of go in about sort of 10 or 12, am I right? And you talk about what happens in those places, where you go, and what happens more or less when you get thrown off. Can you tell how many trespasses did you carry out for the book, and what were the most sort of memorable? Oh, hi, Murray.
Hello, Murray.
Great, he's here. Brilliant. We'll come back to you. We'll come back to you in a minute, mate. All right. Yeah. So, Nick.
I mean, I didn't just trespass for the book. Like, the book was just kind of a window into some of my trespasses. But I've done 3 dukes, countless lords. I've got earls coming out of my ears, basically. Like, I was interested in the places that were owned by offshore private corporations, the sort of shadowy corporations that we know nothing about and pay no tax. Who else did I do? Paul Dacre, that was quite a fun one.
The former editor of the Daily Mail.
Former editor of the Daily Mail. Yeah, Captain Propaganda.
Who was the chap that you actually go and visit? He's an MP, and he gets quite riled by you in a meeting. That was a great scene.
Yeah, I'd say flustered rather than riled. I don't think anyone asks direct questions to people. He was literally the most powerful human being I've ever met.
What's his name?
His name's Richard Benyon. He's very charming. Like, you know, the whole sort of a lot of times this book is presented as Nick Hayes has got a problem with rich landowners. I don't have a problem with the personalities of any of these people necessarily, because I don't know them. Well,
I think that's a great bit of the book, that you come in with that pretty strongly towards the end. And you're like, look, I've got no objection to these people at all. It's more of a sort of philosophical journey, if you like.
Well, it's more, as Winston Churchill said, it's in a way pointless to blame don't blame the player, blame the game kind of thing. That those weren't his words. And I feel like the left get caught up too much. I say in the book, I've marched in countless protests next to people, carrying signs saying "Eat the rich" and
was that a reference to class war? I thought I sort of detected a little bit of that,
all over the place, those signs. So you'll see them.
Yeah. And I think class war started that. I think, and right. Ian Bone's like, they're all wankers, and blames individual people, which is quite funny, but it doesn't. I think I agree. It doesn't really sort of get you anywhere, does it?
To be honest, I think it further entrenches us. It makes it easier to dismiss as kind of personal envy. The law still, 1,000 years later from when it was created, still defines that as harm or tort, is what they call it.
Tort.
Tort. Why they present that as, since John Locke really saying that to take a step over the line of a 5,000 acre woodland is a direct attack on the owner of the land. And for some reason, this goes back to what Mark's saying. I thought what you were saying, Mark, was really interesting about this internalization, because in some ways there's a wall that greets us before we even approach the wall. There's that wall has been created. The Germans kind of have a phrase, always the Germans have a phrase for it, like Mauer in Kopf, like the wall in the mind kind of thing. This sense that, again, Foucault, the carcereal archipelago, this sense that all around us are basically signs or pointers towards what is considered the orthodox consensus correct human to be kind of thing. And certainly with trespassing, it's almost like land rights is a pretty good metaphor for how the whole of society is controlled. Because one thing, like you walk in the countryside, I don't know if anyone listening, or you or anyone that I've ever met has seen the countryside code on a sign in the countryside. I've never seen, every now and then you get one of those council boards with a nice little watercolor of a red kite or something and telling you to look out for this and, don't forget to notice the water sedge and all of that kind of stuff. And those are brilliant, but more often than not, you are just presented with keep out, no trespassing, private property, And barbed wire, if you think about it, is quite a violent thing.
It's a violent thing, and what you're saying is that a lot of these estates, they wouldn't get violent, but the threat of violence is lurking. Now, what about the National Trust? I mean, the National Trust has a reputation as being, fuddy-duddy old ladies. But I mean, if you sort of analyse it politically, it's like an anarchist institution, really. They've opened this stuff up to, for people to share and enjoy. And I think that the roots of it, I think you mentioned in your book, go back to William Morris, Octavia Hill, and so on. Do you approve of the National Trust, what they do?
it's not really for me to approve of one way or the other, but I understand why you're asking it. I think the National Trust have done an incredible job. Like people I know and friends of mine are, you know, sort of ground staff on the National Trust or have been before. And obviously they are employers, well, until very recently where they decided they were going to, you know, cull all their experts basically. But even with my friends who are the ground staff, these people, just like all the gamekeepers really, are people that know an awful lot about the land. And a lot of that is learned from courses or school or university, but the majority of that comes from just the fact that they're out in it for so, you know, so long, and they understand it. What Octavia Hill and William Morris and John Ruskin did came from a very radical socialist sensibility, pretty much just looking at the chronic alcoholism and the, you know, the sort of lung problems, the mental and physical health problems suffered by working class people that were just rammed into really shonky accommodation. And Octavia Hill went on to do all sorts of stuff in terms of housing and all of this kind of thing. But really just one of her, the arms that she used to kind of liberate working class people was the National Trust. And if it wasn't for her as well, the Open Spaces Society, we wouldn't have Epping Forest. I live in East London. We wouldn't have Epping Forest to go to, Kew Gardens, Hampstead Heath, they say, from gravel extraction. William Morris wrote some really blunt words about the kind of covetous money bags who are carving up the countryside and in the same way carving up the culture. But what was so sort of radical about these people was that they were trying to defend beauty. And it's almost like that's too quaint a notion for us in our campaign to even put forward after, you know, sort of 30 years of neoliberalism or whatever. Like beauty itself and beauty for the sake of beauty.
Why? Because it sounds a bit sort of wet. It sounds a bit non-Marxist or something.
I don't think it sounds Marxist. I just
it's a non-Marxist. I mean, you know, it's like, oh, it's all right for you to talk about beauty when people are starving.
Yeah, probably that kind of thing. But for them, beauty had a profound impact on the mind. And they weren't talking about beauty necessarily just for its face value. They were talking about the kind of sensation of serenity that large open spaces bring upon someone, not just the health of, you know, fresh air in the lungs. And actually, scroll forward, you know, 150 years, however long, like science is now providing us with empirical evidence that they were just bang on the money. So we're not talking about beauty with the campaign that we're running. We're talking about mental health and physical health and maybe a little touch of spiritual health, but we don't, you know, we'll have to see how that one goes.
But that does frame it in the sort of, if you like, discourse of today, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you need to use these sorts of terms to get your ideas out there.
Yeah. So, but just in terms of the National Trust, I think they're a brilliant organisation. I don't think that it's fair to. I don't think a charge to for people to access nature allows everyone across the country to access nature. I think it is still a prism or a stratification along the lines of how much coin you've got in your pocket. If we're honest, it's kind of a sort of thing for white middle class people to do on Sundays. And that's certainly not how it was envisioned.
Well, no, I mean, there's huge. We used to live on the coast of North Devon, and there's huge areas there that are owned by the National Trust, which are free for anyone to wander over.
I don't know that exact place, but that might be because they're open access land already by the Countryside and Rights of Way Act.
But yeah, there's something a little bit, obviously, a bit sort of twee about National Trust, isn't there?
No, that's fine. Like, there's a huge part of Englishness that is twee, isn't there? Like, it's one of the pillars we...
Well, going back to this, actually, can we talk about the enclosures? Because this is the turning point, as you rightly say in the book. Medieval England was a very different place where, okay, we didn't have this sort of intense competition in commerce. there was a principle of cooperation, and work was organised around guilds. And in fact, land was, it was felt that, well, the idea of the commons, this is the common land where we can all go and share it. And then that really changed very radically in sort of 1530s, 1540s, or across the 16th century. What happened? What were the Enclosures Acts exactly? Can you just sort of give us your portrait of, or your kind of summary of that process?
Yeah, I'll try. It's, I mean, to be honest, from my perspective, it's kind of very attached to the ideology of the idler, because when the commons became enclosed, what is now called mindfulness, or basically what the landowners saw as peasants sitting around sunning themselves, whilst their cows went to pasture, became called idleness. And idleness is a political slur on autonomous use of time, kind of thing, or a capitalist slur on.
Could you just say that again? That's a brilliant quote. I think we should put that on our Instagram. Idleness, so called, is a slur on. Hang on, can you say it again?
Well, in my opinion, it's about the problem when before the commons were enclosed. The working class, being a peasant of England, was not necessarily equated to being impoverished and not necessarily even with a stigma or shame attached to it. In fact, rich people quite like poor people, because if you gave them money, you were more likely to sit closer to Christ up in heaven, kind of thing. So
that's right. The beggars were fulfilling a social function, because charity was such an important part of your life. So they didn't try and reform beggars or get them into meaningful work.
No, that would be awful, because how could you get to the buffet table in heaven? But yeah, so there was an autonomous self-subsistence. Like you got your winter fuel allowance, your food queues. You got the commons were the welfare state without the stigma of shame. And people were able to hunt, as soon as the commons were enclosed, hunting became redefined as poaching. If you wanted to hunt, in groups of 6, you were allowed to, but only if you could pay the person who would rent you the right to. This is the introduction of rentier capitalism. But basically through, from the 1300s right through to the late 1800s, was a period of enclosure where people took land that was not owned by anyone necessarily, specific individual, but held by a group of locals. And all of these locals, with the rights that they had to take their pigs to pannage, or to, eat acorns, or to collect wood no longer than your arm for your winter fuel. All of these very specific, very localistic rights that you had were completely contingent on your responsibilities, A, to the local community, and B, to the kind of regenerative ability of the land. Like there were reeves that were voted in to basically see if your right was to dig gravel from the land. This is where Richard Benyon comes into it. I don't know if I ever said his name, like the former conservative minister who once was the richest minister in the Houses of Parliament. I think that's now Rishi Sunak, but no one really talks about that at the moment.
Well, yeah, Rishi Sunak is absolutely loaded, and his wife is even more loaded than he is, I think, because her father is a mega billionaire.
Yeah, they're sort of modern aristocrats. But anyway,
yeah, they should be in a sort of Jane Austen novel or something.
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to know their personal history. But when all of these lands were enclosed, and Richard Benyon is a very good example. He's extracting gravel from a place that is called Benyon's Enclosure, that was enclosed in the early 1800s. So right at the end of the spate of enclosure. Previously, all of the residents, as it's Mortimer in around Hampshire at the moment, they would have all had rights to extract enough gravel so that there was enough, so that basically the people that weren't even born yet, the commoners that didn't exist yet, would also have enough gravel to do it. But you put a fence around it, and by the law of property, as defined by John Locke right up to William Blackstone, you have sole total dominion. If you own a plot of land, it's within your right to destroy it. You can just blow the whole lot up if you want, ancient woodland or not. But Richard Benyon is now in the process of extracting, I think it's 350,000 tons of that gravel. That's not a renewable process, but the point is that the wealth that was once shared by the commoners
is now concentrated into the hands of a few.
Yeah, it's as David Harvey says, the accumulation of wealth by the dispossession of the commonwealth kind of thing.
And isn't it also the case that a lot of this land was owned by monasteries and convents and so on? It was church land until Henry VIII sort of handed it over. And the church, by virtue of being Christians, I would have hoped would be less sort of selfishly neoliberal than the people who own it now. Is that more or less true?
Well, if you buy into the church's branding, sure, but I don't know. Like, I don't see. I mean, you might as well see the early Christian church as an early corporation. Like, I don't really know. I mean, I don't think kindness comes from God. I have a much more anarchist or communist perspective that actually people create networks between themselves, and kindness is something that those networks create organically, kind of thing. So, but the church did a lot of work for the poor, and when those lands were basically just taken by Henry VIII, they were then sold off, or as they said in kind of Tudor times, particularized. They were turned into particular little bits of private ownership. And so all of that land, the thing is, the peasants worked it, but they paid the church in terms of their produce and stuff. So it wasn't necessarily.
No, it was a two-way thing. But that land grab by Henry also created a sort of massive Tudor homeless problem, didn't it? Because you suddenly had these monks and nuns who had previously been housed, and you suddenly had the poor people who'd been looked after by the monasteries, literally just sort of wandering around with nothing to do, and they were called vagrants, and they were. But I mean, to me, that was the sort of beginning of the modern world, because they tried to sort of, they invented the houses of correction. So these people had to be corrected because they were wandering vagrants, and they had like a V branded on them.
Yeah.
And if they continue to sort of refuse to work, then they'd be either sort of killed or sent to Australia or something.
Yeah, and Foucault wrote a bit about this as well, because he was interested. The kind of the second spate was post the Napoleonic Wars kind of thing, and all of these soldiers. The Duke of Wellington, who extracted me from his river, after the Napoleonic Wars, he was gifted, I think, something like 7,000 acres. And a quarter of the River Loddon that sort of went through these things. Whereas, of course, the 30,000 people who had actually fought the wars came back. As today, the way we treat our modern soldiers, were given very little provision in terms of work or food or pension. And they also were sort of left to wander the streets and rounded up and just bunged in the workhouse kind of thing, as if that was their fault. And vagrancy, this is the really interesting thing. This is where the idea of land rights does sort of bleed into a kind of social or moral perspective, because vagrancy was seen very much as an infestation of the mind that then went to infest the state kind of thing. And this is also where the kind of today's modern, just as alive as it ever has been, bigotry against the traveling community comes from. It's, when Henry VIII basically coined the word gypsies by referring to Roma people that were from Rajasthan originally as Egyptians, and gypsies came to be like that. He basically, when he provided the Egyptians Act, it wasn't so much coming from a racist or anti-migration kind of perspective. He
Oh,
gave.
hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, but we don't really want to hear you, Lizzie. We want to listen to Nick. So we'll go back to you, Nick.
Sorry, Lizzie. I don't know what happened. Yeah, so the whole point was part of the act was built in that these people wouldn't be punished or thrown into the workhouse or hanged if only they gave up their idle, ungodly travelling. So the real root of this fear is one of the orthodoxy of fixity.
You've got to be in the same place. Well, this is brilliant stuff. We'll come back to questions in a moment. I'm sure someone will have the obvious question for you, which you must have been asked 10,000 times, which is, well, I wouldn't want someone jumping over the wall into my garden, but we'll come back to that because that's obviously familiar to you.
Yeah.
And in between, let's go over to Murray. Let me just unmute you. Hello, Murray. Where is he? Come on, unmute him. Oh, yeah. There it is. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very well. Yeah. So you're not feeling tip top today.
I've got a cold, and it is a cold because I know what having a cold is like.
Yeah, so it's not coronavirus
All the
or anything.
symptoms of a cold and nothing else. Yeah. But good to be here. Hi.
Murray, can you tell us a bit about what you're about to sing to us?
Well, this is a piece. I've got two pieces. One which is a song, and the other one is a piece of rhyming verse. And the song is it's written to a traditional Ewan MacColl collected traditional English folk tune, which was originally known as "A Begging I Will Go," which is an interesting thing chiming with the conversation so far. And that song was very much written from the perspective of a beggar, and how a beggar. And I suppose that the whole idea of how folk music actually takes the dehumanizing effects of the dominions of orthodoxy and what that does to people, and then turns it back and speaks it from the tongue of the masses. And so I have flipped the "A Begging I Will Go" tune into "A Dogging I Will Go." And dogging, of course, is another thing that challenges the dominions of orthodoxy on a couple of levels. Being that of sexual transgressiveness, and then the places that it goes on as well, which are probably the last commons to some extent, which are car parks and lay-bys, which seem to be ownerless areas. I mean, and car parks at night don't seem to belong to anyone either. So I think it fits really well within it. And it's and I would attempt to sing it to you. I don't know what my voice is going to sound like because it was but here we go. "A Dogging I Will Go."
Okay, thanks, Murray. I'm just going to mute.
In the car parks north of Manchester, and in the lay-bys west of Leeds, and sometimes in the Pennines, I have satisfied me needs, and a dogging I will go, and a dogging I will go. Well, I've dogged my way through Cornwall on the top of Bodmin Moor. I dogged me way to Crows and Ray, and then I dogged some more. And a dogging I will go, and a dogging I will go. Have a strangely worded business card, and a wet wipes in me bag. I'm gentle as a kitten, though I'm randy as a stag, and a dogging I will go, and a dogging I will go. In Wales, the Brecon beacons are Aberystwyth to the west. I dogged the Dyfi Valley, but Machynlleth was the best. And a dogging I will go, and a dogging I will go. And I started out in dogging in the year of 89. And now I do it most every night. You could say I've hit me prime. And dogging I will go, and dogging I will go. I've dogged me way through Scotland, gone beyond the Highland line, and many's the crowd of midges that's attacked me bare behind. And dogging I will go, and dogging I will go. And there's some that walk coastal paths, and there's others ring the bell. But me, I likes me dogging because I can dog so well. And dogging I will go, and dogging I will go.
Some of our American cousins are asking what dogging is.
Well, dogging is, I thought it was, I'm sure it goes on in America as well, maybe under a different title, but it's the meeting of folk in public places, effectively car parks and other such roadside places for sex in their cars. And and apparently how it goes is that there'll be an internet chat room or something, and I don't know whether it's just whether it is a child of the information revolution, but so somebody will say, we are thinking about going to X car park at wherever, and then another person will say, yes, I'll do that, and then safe people are allowed into that group. And so the people who are meeting in these places, it's not just people showing up in cars and getting it on. It's people who have formed a group of doggers to do it. And so the idea is, I think, and then they have various signals, you know, that if windscreen wipers come closer, a window wound down apparently invites a hand to go through the window. A door open invites a person to join whoever is doing whatever they're doing. And so it has a sort of a system of codes and stuff. I have not partaken in dogging myself, but I'm fascinated by the whole thing and what it actually means, because I think one of the most interesting things about it as well is it's completely anti-bourgeois as well. It's not.
Well, that's what we're saying. Nick, can we come back to you for a sec, because where are you? Are you still there? I didn't mute you, did I?
You did mute me. I'm here. I can unmute myself.
Oh, good. You can unmute yourself. Did you? Well, you do talk about sex in the wild and outdoors being sort of particularly exciting. So I guess you could sort of, and you talk about transgression, trespassing. You can sort of see where the doggers might be coming from. I mean, it is in a way a sort of anti-bourgeois transgressive movement.
Well, I thought that was a brilliant. I just thought it was a brilliant song, Murray. That was cool. Thank you. You made me chortle. I actually looked. For the book, I was intending to do, in the early sort of foothills of the book, I was intending to do a sort of Louis Theroux on dogging, because I thought that there's, as I still do think, there's this very boring convention of what almost like brand of the countryside. What is the countryside for? It's basically for people in sort of quite appropriate anoraks to go for a nice walk. And there's certainly, me and my friends, maybe once we've gone for a nice walk, but you know, it's more about fires, banjos, drugs, swimming, kayaking, this whole sense that the countryside exists for pleasantry is certainly not historically supportable either. Like the commons were places of
fun for merrymaking.
Yeah, fun and a distinct lack of hypocrisy. So I looked up dogging because I thought we go to Epping to basically take mushrooms and play banjo quite a lot and just have a loud raucous time, because there's nowhere else in my tower block that we're able to do that, and it's more beautiful. So we have often passed the doggers in the, you know, like two ships passing in the night. Evening, like that. And I looked up the website, and actually, it's very sweet. It's one of those old 90s websites on a blue background with yellow writing that's got like 6 exclamation marks after everything. And it's all about consent, and it's all about, you know, a very, very rigorous code of listening to what the other person wants. And so, of course, Orthodox society decides that it's a bad thing, because actually it's an autonomous group of individuals that get titillated in the way that they do. And also, maybe there's even a class side to it. Like, you get big ass sex parties happening in Mayfair and all of those kind of things. But if you're 2 up and 2 down, that can't really accommodate 20 people grunting and moaning in your terrace, then why not? I'm just talking about the pragmatics of it. Why not go to the car park?
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to your next book, The Book of Dogging. It's going to be good.
Book of Dogging, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good title. Or How to Dog.
How to...
Kathleen, can I just ask, how many questions have we got? We got another...
I've got 3 questions lined up. So
okay. Have we got time for another quick poem from Murray? Because we were going to do one other one for you, weren't we, Murray?
Yeah, why don't we do another one and then go to Q&A?
Murray, do you want to do another quick poem before we do the Q&A?
I mean, no pressure. I'm happy to, if you would like me to, sure. So this one is, this deals with the another dominion of orthodoxy, in the sense of, and I think particularly at the moment we are dealing with a lot of, as was discussed earlier, the idea of censorship, of thinking about things, of thoughts coming into our minds, very much in the way of the approaching of the sacred spring. And then, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? Should I be afraid? Should I not be afraid? And people's desire to be part of the pack, and then the part of the pack being moved around by the use of public relations and propaganda. And this piece is really a call out to say that that thought that comes into your head in your own voice may not necessarily be yours. And it's called negative thoughts. Negative thoughts, oh, they come and they go. But sometimes they come a lot more than they go. For thoughts create feelings, and feelings then feel. And that's why it's easy to feel they are real. Because when they arrive, they suggest that they're you, and that you should do just what they say you should do. And then slowly the negative thoughts can begin to widen the door, and then wander right in, and then do what they like, and then say what they please, and stifle your life with their negative squeeze. So why not breathe in and then exercise choice? And why not breathe out and say no to the voices, and say, I'm worth more, much, much more than all that, and that negative voices are uncool and old hat, and get used to calling the negative out. And slowly it turns from a scream to a shout to a murmur, a whisper, and then best of all, the voice will one day become nothing at all unless it speaks nicely and says, let's have fun, or suggests quite warm-heartedly what might be done. For why would you possibly talk to yourself in a way that you'd not talk to anyone else? So why not decide that it's time to get free and stand up to the deeply uncool voice of negativity? Dr. Zeus, eat your heart out.
Yeah, man, fantastic. Lots of round of applause. Now, Kathleen, let's go over to some questions. Murray, thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, Murray. Yeah, so I've got some questions. So first off, shall we start with Andrew, who has a question for Nick? So Andrew, if you could just unmute yourself.
I quite often trespass, and because I live in Norfolk, there's quite a lot of choice. I've found though that when I'm challenged by landowners or gamekeepers or whoever, they often cite something like deer stalking or lamping as being a possibility that I might be shot. So my question is it better, do you think, to trespass in high vis, so you don't get mistaken for that sort of thing? Or alternatively, to just sort of keep it discreet and try to be subtle, which I always try to do, and therefore less likely being seen at all?
It's a really good question. It's a practical question. I like it. There was nothing about the book when I went trespassing for the book that was sneaky. There's only one time that I run away from a gamekeeper just because I really want to see the Capability Brown folly, and I can't be asked to be, you know, with the whole, are you lost? But the truth is, I think high vis is a really good idea, because it also kind of undermines this sense that you should have anything to hide. Like if someone, I mean, burglars don't wear high vis to jump over into someone's back garden. But the truth, like the boring answer is, Scotland is famous for its grouse shooting, and is famous for its stag hunting and its fishing, and also famous for its 2003 Land Reform Act, which brought right to roam across land and water. So really what it's about, and this goes back to that old commons pre-enclosure thing, is that people should learn to share. And this idea that the woodlands of England have to be, the public have to be banned from the woodlands of England simply because the pheasants that weren't even reared here in the first place, they were imported from France in crates smaller than Tesco chickens are allowed to have. We shouldn't be allowed into those woods because those pheasants will get scared or get or sort of ruin the shooting, or that we'd get shot. If you want to do shooting, that's a whole different argument, and we can't go into it right now, the ethics of hunting and all of that. But if people find it as a pastime, then sure, they should also have rights to shoot the pheasant, but they should have rights that don't supersede those of the public, because there are more of the public, and the public need the health of forest bathing or swimming in the rivers. And in Scotland, kayakers are allowed to, basically they do deals. You're salmon fishing at this time of the year, that's great. We'll avoid that stretch of water, we'll avoid that stretch of water. The real answer is dialogue, and Scotland have written papers about dialogue and how they have proved to be much more practical than just signs saying do this, don't do that. So high vis.
Thank you, Nick. Next, I've got a question from Jonathan Green. Jonathan, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Nick. Fantastic book. Thank you very much. It's brilliantly researched, and it struck so many chords with me. My question is this, and it overlaps a little bit with Andrew's question just now. Have you, or do you ever engage with or stand up to the landowners if you're confronted? I've got some mileage in such circumstances by asking, well, what do you do with this land? And is any part of your enjoyment of this land derived from your ability to exclude other people from it? So I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
No, that's a really good question. I speak to everyone, whoever I meet, whether they're a landowner or it's just one of the joys of being in the countryside. You meet people that my sort of hemmed in little bubble doesn't allow me to meet. It's a wide open space and lots of people are there. You're always going to lose a conversation with a landowner or a gamekeeper, basically because of the two things: reasonable force and basically the sort of breaching of the peace. When the police come, if you're still arguing, the police will arrest you if you carry on arguing. That's the way it works. I can see your reaction that you're like, I don't think they have the inclination to talk ethics, and the law allows them to just not engage, kind of thing. But tell me, go on, tell me what you're going to say.
Well, I'm actually a criminal barrister, so I know a little bit about the law. And, you know, trespass is not a criminal offence. You know, you can legitimately say to a landowner, well, I mean, obviously you want to avoid conflict if possible, but you can legitimately say, okay, well, call the police then, if you want to get rid of me. The police have better things to do. They're not going to turn up just in order to evict you from property. If you're not causing any trouble, you're not being violent, you're not doing anything wrong. And you know, you say you always lose these sort of conversations. I've, you know, given them pause for thought, at least, by saying, well, you know, I'm not doing any harm. I want to do on this land exactly what you do on this land, which is just enjoy it, enjoy the beauty of it, enjoy the countryside. And you know, it is possible to engage with these people and to maybe, you know, change their minds.
But I mean, absolutely. But even if you change the minds, the best you're going to get is a permissive path, you know, and then their son will take over and decide, just like lockdown has happened. I mean, can I ask you a question? Because you're a criminal barrister, and that's awesome.
I've got quite a few questions, other questions as well, maybe. I don't know, Tom, how many?
Quickie on reasonable force? Just a quick question on reasonable force? Or maybe not. Okay, I'll play by the rules.
Okay. Well,
another time. I'll
yeah, another time. Pursue that. Let's give some other people a chance, Kathleen. I think you're right.
So I've got a question from Mark Price. Who would like to ask Nick a question. Mark, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. So, hi Nick, that was really great, and I've yeah, there's 100 questions I would like to ask, but one in particular, you mentioned about the different kind of signs and barriers that you encountered, and one in particular strikes us as the differential between barbed wire, which is often used livestock in, but then razor wire, which is very much a kind of keep out. And have you observed anything, or have you anything to say about either the character or seriousness of the perception of the transgression, either from the player or in terms of the whole game, as you called it?
Well, one of the great things I found out about barbed wire was in kind of Woody Guthrie era, so sort of 1920s, 1930s America. It was actually used, or actually, sorry, before that, 1890s, it was used to roll out the first telephone lines. Like they used there was so much wire to keep cattle in that they used them to, they found that they could get a faint line just to see if it worked across America, kind of thing. Which is kind of like metaphorically or poetically quite, it's how you use a tool. Either the wire connects people or it divides them. But what was sorry, there was a sort of reception problem.
Oh, let's just unmute you. Sorry, Mark, start again. You were muted there.
Thanks, Tom. No, it was the difference, relatively gentleness used about the livestock control, but there are barriers like razor wire, which are very explicit and aggressive means of maintaining the boundary. And it was just, have you observed any characteristics about that, or do you see any differences between those who use razor wire and where they use it, or other such very serious, you know, barriers to any you know, movement?
Yeah, the only time I've really come face to face with razor wire, which is just nasty. That's sort of the napalm of, it's just got a nasty core to it. But that was in Calais. Like one of the chapters in the books is in set in the Calais camp that they called the Jungle. And I watched Syrian refugees, you know, Somalian refugees, put 2 or 3 layers of blankets over this thing, hoist each other up, and just by the luck of where their body touched, like some were either like very badly gouged and others were off, kind of thing. And the point to make there, because that's a very particular small scale, or as in person to person, but the point is that it's the borders themselves that cause the violence. Like, you know, Europe has a desperate need for migration. It's an aging population. And obviously with climate change and like various wars and pressures, migration is only going to increase. So this razor wire fence is not going to stop. It's not going to perform its political duty. It's just going to eviscerate people who are running away from another kind of mutilation. But
well, can we move on now? We've got about 1 minute. Well, actually, we're over 1 minute, aren't we, Kathleen? How many more questions have we got?
Thanks, Mark.
I've got a couple, but maybe if we're over time, it's up to you, Tom. Whatever you like.
Okay, well, let's just have one more question, and then we'll because people have booked in to probably leave at 7. So just have one more question, and then we'll do our song.
It's really just to pull all this together. I mean, we've talked about access to land and rivers. I mean, ultimately, as we know, 50% of our land is owned by 1% of the population. So it's actually really for Nick, what do we need to do differently? What do we need to change given the status of inheritance and the law and all that kind of stuff? What needs to change?
There's so many issues to do with bringing equality into the land and community ownership and land value tax and all of those kind of things. But to stick to the theme, we need to, our campaign says it at righttorome.org.uk. We are proposing that we simply extend the Countryside and Rights of Way Act to cover rivers, woodland, downland and greenbelt. And we've highlighted those because the science that we're putting forward proving how people need a daily interaction and a connection with nature. We're proposing these terrains simply because they would offer people not this kind of weekend break to the Peak District if you can afford it or spare the time. But if Greenbelt is open, that's 60% of English people, or of the population of England, that will have easy access to open space, fresh air and nature. If rivers were open, which is my personal, main desire, there's rivers flowing, like the people that went during lockdown to Bournemouth Beach must have crossed 20 rivers to get to crowd Bournemouth Beach. And yet, of course, everyone calls them COVIDiots but if only we opened up this space, you don't have to change who owns it. You have to reignite the Countryside Code. You have to make very clear and even tighten up the legislation around the responsibilities that people owe to nature, because landowners and farmers and land workers have valid points that people, that they're, and concerns, but the public badly need a connection to nature. So go to righttorome.org.uk and sign up and help us get those things. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Ian, and thank you, Nick. That's absolutely fascinating, and I hope everyone will log on to the website and take a look, because it's a really important thing that Nick's doing, and it's a it's a brilliant book as well. I mean, it's incredibly good fun. You can tell from meeting Nick this evening that he's a jolly good fellow, and it's very witty, and it's not hectoring or anything like that. It's got a sort of merry anarchist sensibility, which I think is really important right now. It's just the right response to where we are. And thanks everyone for coming. Now we're going to move over to the song, I think. DJ Kathleen Mayer. It's a fairly obvious tune for what we've been talking about, but it's a lovely, lovely, lovely song.